And I had one friend who, just kind of openly said to me she doesn't think she could morally be my friend anymore.
Hi, everyone. This episode, we talked to the president at the ProLife Club at the University of Saskatchewan, Caterina Eremondi, about her pro-choice to pro-life conversion. I'm Ben Matichuk, and this is the Extra Pro-Life Show. Caterina, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And Caterina, it's a pleasure to have you. Let me just say that. Even though you now despise things that are good and hate women, which is interesting because that's your own gender. I just want to say,
I hate
really
myself.
do.
Yeah.
Indeed. But even so, we're glad you're here. Even so.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. Yeah. Cool.
Now we're gonna get right into it, and obviously we'll kind of delve into your background and basically go through the conversion. Obviously, you have an opinion that you haven't always held, and we want to find out more about that. So first question is, of course, you grew up Catholic, and obviously Catholics are typically pro-life. I'm evangelical, and of course evangelicals are typically pro-life. Did you grow up, even though you grew up Catholic, did you grow up a pro-choice person, or did that happen later?
So I'd say I, for the most part, grew up pro-life. But growing up pro-life for me didn't really mean that I understood the pro-life position, or that I really knew what I was kind of pushing when I said I was pro-life. It was more just the communities I was in, the people I was around were all pro-life, so I kind of was too. And I know when I was, when I first learned about abortion, I obviously thought it was an awful thing. But I didn't really think much of it. I didn't really think about it very much at all when I was a kid. And then when I was 15, I actually left the Catholic Church, and that was kind of when I sort of turned into a pro-choice kind of advocate. And at that point, again, it was almost kind of like another jumping on bandwagons, but I was more informed at that point. So, and I was very much influenced by the whole message of my body, my choice kind of deal. So, yeah.
Now, getting into, I guess, the conversion back, I'm just trying to think about how I want to unpack this. But of course, let's just start with the basics. 15, left the Catholic Church, got into kind of the pro-choice movement, and then of course you shifted back. And how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting because I came back to the Catholic Church when I was 19. And at that point, I was still adamantly pro-choice because I really believed I couldn't choose, even if I believed. And I maybe never really. Yeah, it's hard to say, but even if I believed that abortion was wrong, I couldn't put that on another person, right? I couldn't, especially women who were in like horrible situations, who were in, certain situations of abuse and poverty and all that kind of stuff. I just felt like I didn't have a say to decide what they did with their own bodies. And so so I came back to the church. I was still adamantly pro-choice. And I remember, getting into discussions, because now I was surrounding myself with more people who were Catholic, and more people who were Christian, and who had these pro-life views. And I remember getting into so many discussions with people and arguments with people about pro-choice argument, or pro-life versus pro-choice, and like adamantly defending the pro-choice side. So it was after, about a little, it was about 6 months or so after I kind of reverted back to Catholicism. The one thing that Catholicism did do for me, it didn't make me pro-life, but the one thing it did do was it introduced me to philosophical thought and reasoning, which was really cool. And so from that point, I took on this almost Socratic method in my brain, where I was kind of arguing pro-choice over here, pro-life over here, and I was seriously steel manning both positions for about 6 to 9 months in my brain, trying to figure out where I actually stood and what was right and what I could say objectively was the truth. Yeah, and eventually I came to the conclusion that being pro-life was just the way to be. And even then, I still struggled. Like, I was very stubborn to kind of getting into the movement and to even just wanting to call myself pro-life because, you know, I
Right.
had friends who were pro-choice and all that kind of stuff. So, but one night I kind of had this experience in prayer that just made me realize that I can't be silent while thousands of children are dying
Mm.
every day.
Now, I want to really get into that, and because of course, when when you have a certain belief, you surround yourself with like-minded people. Like that's not to one side. Everybody does that. That's called being a human being. So I want to delve into that a little bit and sort of like, do you still have pro-choice friends? What was their reaction when you converted back, and sort of how did you kind of get into more of a pro-life community? So I want to go into all of that, just even as we look at the main differences that you've experienced between here's my experience in the pro-choice movement and here's my experience in the pro-life movement. So that's very general, but unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so I'd say kind of the pro-choice movement is um, I'd say, and I'd say this honestly, the pro-choice movement, there are a lot of good people on the pro-choice side. Um, there are a lot of people who genuinely a, want good, the best outcome for the woman, for everybody really involved.
Mhm.
But I think there's definitely a fundamental difference in what the opinion of what a fetus is. I think is kind of the biggest, or what the unborn are. And
Right.
what I know, like, is that being in the pro-life movement, there's a lot more talk about these kind of things, right? When you're pro-choice, and you're in a pro-choice community, it's kind of just all given, and there isn't really there's talk about um, kind of the implications of abortion, and there's talk about the implications of what happens if it's made illegal and that kind of stuff, but there isn't really talk about what is an abortion and what it's actually doing and what are um, fetuses and embryos. Whereas
Mhm.
in the pro-life communities, um, that's kind of the biggest thing, is we're trying to figure out what is actually going on when an abortion is happening, and we're trying to have those dialogues, and we're trying to talk
Mhm.
and be open to everybody who has been affected by this, right? So
Mhm. And
mhm.
I take you still, based on what you said, I take you still have pro-choice friends.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
And so was it difficult, of course, having spent the last however many years surrounding yourself with those friends who are pro-choice? Did you have difficulty kind of getting into another community, or was that easier for you?
I don't think I had too much difficulty. I think that the nice thing is there are a lot of very welcoming pro-life groups out there that will support you and will welcome you, and you don't even really and just want to have these conversations with you and help you learn about all of this. So I'd say it wasn't too hard. I will say though, you know, when I left, when I stopped, or like when I became pro-life, I did have friends who were not okay with it. And I had some friends who cut ties with me, which was kind of tough. And I had one friend who, yeah, just kind of openly said to me she doesn't think she could morally be my friend anymore, given given that I was pro-life now. And it's funny because we're still friends, which is really good.
Oh, really? That's
He's,
awesome.
he's actually a really good friend of mine. So that I can go into that if you wanna know how that all happened. But yeah, um,
Well, something that I'm wondering, because I want to touch on, of course, the similarities as you have a little bit between the two movements. There's the fundamental difference of belief about what a fetus is. Did you have a similar experience when you were 15 and you left the Catholic Church? Like, did you have sort of these similar difficult interactions then as well?
You know what? Not so much. But I think the reason why is because when I left the Catholic Church, I was the one who honestly cut ties with everybody who I used to know. And I think it wasn't, yeah, I just didn't encounter pro-life people anymore because I just completely cut ties with everybody. And the only pro-life people that I was around were people of my own family, and we just didn't talk about it. So
Right.
that was kind of how it worked. Yeah. So
Okay. Okay. No, that's very interesting. And we've already touched on this as well, but again, it's sort of you have two different sides who want to help women, and I would say the culture
mhm,
as a whole, and two fundamental differences about how to do that. And of course, a lot of that is based on what somebody thinks of a fetus, or to what extent somebody values a fetus. So, what was the main shift there for you? Sort of being pro-choice. How did you think of a fetus then, and how does that compare to how you consider a fetus now?
right. So I'd almost say um, that when I was pro-choice, I just didn't even think of the fetus, and I would honestly put it that way. Um, that it wasn't like I pretended like it didn't exist, like the fetus doesn't exist. Like it certainly wasn't that, but it was more just what we see is the woman, who the person who's suffering right now is the woman, and so she's the one who deserves to say, and that was kind of the pro-choice side of everything. um when I did do that, whole 6 month 9 month dialogue in my brain, it was there was a lot of, okay, that the fetus is human, right? Human parents, you can't deny human DNA, unique human DNA that no other human will have. um, the fetus is alive, meets the biological tenets of life. um,
Right.
you know Fetuses after, what is it, 12 weeks can feel pain, or so, or is it 20? Oh, I guess the jury's still out on that one. But
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, it does depend on the source, but it's quite early on. Yeah.
But right, like, and they're growing, they're constantly developing. I wouldn't claim that a 2-year-old is any less of a human than or is any more of a human than a newborn, because the 2-year-old is more developed than the newborn, right? And so when I looked at this and I unpacked it from a philosophical perspective, it made a lot of sense that, okay, if the embryo are human, and if the embryo are, or if the fetus is human, fetus unborn, if the unborn are human, if the
Right.
unborn
Yeah.
are living, then they must be human beings, they must be persons. And it just seems to me that to be a person just means that you are a human being. um, yeah.
Hmm. Um, this is something that I want to touch on. It's based on a philosophy that I have, namely that especially relevant to the Christian faith, being a Christian myself, and of course you are. Not that you have to be Christian to be pro-life, because it's a very logical position and scientific. But of course, it's popular in Christian communities. Now, all that said, I've always had a philosophy that if there's somebody in the Christian faith, or if there's somebody in the pro-life movement who used to be on the other side, I really do want to listen to that person, because I had a very wholesome upbringing. I never got into the party scene or anything like that. So then if I go to, I work with youth, and if I go to youth and I say, hey, don't go to parties, then that doesn't have a lot of value, because I haven't actually experienced that side of things. But then I remember hearing a friend of mine give his testimony, and he did get into that scene. And
Mhm.
and he said, don't get into the party scene, because it is a lonely, lonely place. And he could say
Mhm.
that because he's been there. And the reason that's well, that kind of feeds my philosophy of our greatest allies are those who used to be enemies, right? So if somebody joins our team, then we should all hoard to listen to that person, because you basically, for lack of a better term, you kind of have inside information, right? Where it's like, here's what the other side is doing, or here's what the other side believes, or here's what the other side actually is. Not in a way to infiltrate, but in a way to be like, maybe I have this misconception about somebody who's pro-choice, and then you can come in and say, well, no, they're actually good people. They just have a wrong belief. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's very long-winded. All that to say, w- w- being being in this belief that you have been and now coming to the pro-life side, is this something that you have actually found yourself using as a tool when you've participated in pro-life activism?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I remember, having certain conversations with people. I think there's a lot of fear in the pro-choice side as well.
Yeah.
I will say that. Uh, there's, I mean, we're all scared of something, and I know I was having a conversation with one person who was terrified at the thought of abortion being illegal, because where do you draw the line between an abortion and a miscarriage was basically um, what they were scared of. And and definitely we hear stories and the media, that kind of stuff. It always
Yeah.
it isn't necessarily right. We have to take things and discern them properly, but we hear stories of women who have had miscarriages and have perhaps been arrested or been imprisoned or whatever. And I think there's a fear that if abortion was illegal, then what's to stop that? And I think that knowing that position and knowing how frustrated I am when I hear these stories definitely helped me in that conversation, because I was able to say, well, here's the thing, right? There's a difference between something happening that wasn't willed and something happening that was willed.
Hmm.
And if you will the end of the life of your child and act towards that, then that's an issue. Whereas if you didn't will the end of the life of your child and your child ends up dying, like, there's no culpability on you. You haven't done anything wrong, right? um there's that. There's also, I know a lot of, I meet people who have had abortions, and they're scared that,
Yeah.
well, if abortion became illegal, what would happen to me? Right? What would happen? Would I go to prison? Would I have to, kind of thing. And I know that, you know being on the pro-choice side and seeing just how influential kind of the pro-choice side is on women, the way it tells women to not care, to disregard their children, to not care about them, and the way it influences them, and the way it also, in some ways claims that abortion is the only option, which
Hmm.
I find interesting because, they're pro-choice, but they
Right.
claim abortion is the only option in a lot of situations. And, in that regard, and a lot of people have mixed positions on this, but I always come to these conversations with with a mindset of, you don't need to be punished for having an abortion. Um, but it was a terrible thing. But ultimately, and I think part of this also comes from kind of my faith background too, is that, you know I'd rather show you mercy than punishment, right? And I'd rather show you mercy than judgment. And I'd rather help you heal from that, because I also recognize that there are a lot of women who have had abortions who are really hurting, who regret their choice. So yeah.
Hmm. Now, this is kind of reaching back into something that we were discussing before, and then I just have one final question that I want to ask you. But before that final question, what was it that ultimately led you back to the Catholic Church?
Oh yeah. I'll be honest. Uh, yeah, I struggled for a lot of years with my mental health,
Oh,
and I think coming back to the Catholic Church I was kind of in a rock bottom place in my life, I guess is the way to put it.
hmm.
And it became a prayer one night, which became a prayer the next night, which became, you know, maybe I should go to church. And then, of course, the priest at church um, preached exactly to what I needed. And I was kind of I guess, hooked at that point. But yeah, it was definitely a situation of I really had nowhere else to go and nowhere else to turn. And I don't think I ever really stopped. I would have considered myself agnostic
Hmm.
back in those days. I don't think I ever really stopped believing in God, but so yeah, maybe I stopped believing that he loved me or that he
Right.
had anything to do with the world, but I didn't really stop believing in God. So
Right.
yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, rock bottom is such a gift. You don't really see it at the time, but that's, you
Only
looking
look
back, that's
up.
usually what it is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's very true, and that kind of leads well into this last question that I have for you, which is simply, uh, well, the question is, what would you tell your pro-choice self? But I want to expand it to even say, looking back at, of course, the person who was away from the church, who believed certain things, and now being who you are now, looking back, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would probably tell myself just to not be afraid to take the time and take the energy to examine the value of human life. Um, I gotta say, like, I didn't value human life. Um, and that's not to say that I didn't value individual persons that were in my life. Like, I've always been a people person. I've always loved other people. Um, but in general, like, and I don't think there's ever been anybody like that I've met who I didn't think they should be alive or anything, right? Like that kind
Right.
of situation. But,
Right. Yeah.
um, but I think in general, like I didn't value what it meant to be a human and what it meant to be living. And I think what I would really tell myself is just take the time to think about it. Take the time to discuss it with yourself and discuss it with people around you. What does it mean to have human value? What does it mean to be alive and what does it mean to be a
Right.
human? Um, and I'd probably also say, you're loved and you're worth it. You're worth your life. Your life is worth it. Um, yeah. So
Mhm.
that's probably where I would go from there.
Hmm. No, that's great. That's awesome. And yeah, it really is just a powerful thing to sort of have a story from both sides, like we touched on. I've never been pro-choice, right? I've always been part of the pro-life movement, as um, many on the pro-life side have, and so it just really means that yeah, stories like yours do have a lot of value. So we do really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Well, that is what we have for you guys today. And of course, we want to thank you for watching and choosing to learn more about what abortion is, about what it is to be pro-life. These are all very important things. And as you may know, we are a national pro-life organization. The National Campus Life Network is a national pro-life organization in Canada. We work with university students to change their hearts and minds on the issue of abortion and then train them to stand up against it. And we aim to systematically align an entire generation to reject abortion, which is the greatest human rights injustice of our time, killing an average of 100,000 preborn people a year in Canada. So as a national organization, we span across Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and we are entirely supported by the generosity of pro-life individuals who want to see youth reject abortion. So today, I just want to ask that you would consider joining our team to partner with us in exposing abortion, empowering youth, and dismantling the abortion industry. Now, by visiting ncln.ca/donate right now, you can become part of the team that is making this happen. So this would look like a monthly investment of $10, $20, $30, or a one-time investment of whatever you can give. So if you have any questions, you can contact us at info@ncln.ca. We appreciate that these are, of course, your hard-earned dollars, and we hope to someday meet as many as we can of those who have donated to us in person. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for those who would decide to donate, to pray for us. This is heavy work. This is heavy work. I know that I consider myself blessed that I get to fight for our society's most defenseless. It is honestly a privilege more than anything else, and so I hope that you will just consider joining with what we're doing, so that we can truly fight for the unborn and make a difference for those who have no voice in this country. So yeah, once again, we really appreciate you tuning in. We really hope that you got a lot out of Caterina's story, and we will see you next time. God bless you all. I do what I want. I'm gonna sing and I'm gonna sing.